No one noticed the gun at first. All eyes were fixed on the twins, two small bodies shaking in the center of a luxury restaurant, glasses frozen mid-air, conversations dying one by one, the name Gambino pressed against every chest like a warning label. When Simon Gambino stood up, armed men moved with him, sealing the room in silence. This was the moment people usually remembered. The powerful mafia boss, the sick children, the fear. But that was not the real beginning. The real beginning was a woman in a server's uniform, standing very still near the back of the room, realizing two terrifying truths at the same time. First, the children were about to lose control completely. Second, if she stepped forward, she would not be allowed to walk away. She saw the gun under the table before anyone else did. She knew who it was meant for, and she stepped forward anyway. That was the night Simon Gambino lost control of his world, and unknowingly chose the one person who could destroy it. No one in the restaurant noticed the sound at first. It was not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft, uneven breath coming from the small body seated at the center of the private dining area. Then another. Too fast, too shallow, too wrong. Simon Gambino felt it before he saw it. His twins stiffened almost at the same time. Tiny fingers curled inward, knuckles whitening. One of them let out a thin, broken cry that cut straight through the low hum of the restaurant. The air changed instantly. Conversations fell apart mid-sentence. Forks froze inches above porcelain plates. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered, sharp and loud, and the sound made everything worse. The children began to shake. Chairs scraped back. Men in dark suits moved as one, hands already on their weapons. In less than 5 seconds, the restaurant was no longer a restaurant. It was a sealed room. Exits blocked, windows guarded, guns visible, unapologetic. No one moved closer. No one dared. Everyone in the room knew who Simon Gambino was. They knew what his money could buy, what his anger could erase, and what his silence usually meant for the unlucky. When his children were involved, even the bravest men suddenly remembered how fragile their lives were. Simon stood slowly, his chair sliding back with controlled precision. His face showed nothing, not panic, not fear, only a cold, focused stillness that frightened people more than shouting ever could. "Get them space," he said quietly. The command rippled outward. Tables were pushed back. A wide, empty circle formed around the twins, as if fear itself had carved it into the room. But the shaking did not stop. Across the room, near the service corridor, Natasha stood frozen. She was wearing a simple black uniform, hair pulled back, hands gripping a tray she no longer remembered lifting. To everyone else, she was invisible, just another server trying not to attract attention in a room full of powerful people. But her eyes were locked on the children. She recognized the signs immediately. The rigid posture, the frantic breathing, the way their bodies fought sensations they could no longer process. She had seen this before. Too many times. In clinics, in quiet rooms filled with soft lights and carefully chosen sounds. Sensory overload. Her heart began to pound. Instinct told her to move. Training screamed at her to act. Every part of her professional self knew exactly what could help. What might slow the spiral before it became something far more dangerous? Every part of her survival instinct told her to stay where she was. She took one step forward. A hand grabbed her arm hard. "Are you insane?" the restaurant manager hissed under his breath, eyes wide with terror. "Do you want to die?" Natasha swallowed. Her mouth was dry. Her pulse roared in her ears. She could feel the weight of the guns in the room, even without looking at them. She hesitated. Exactly 1 second. Then she gently pulled her arm free and stepped into the open space. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but Simon Gambino saw it immediately. His head turned, slow and deliberate. His gaze landed on her like a physical force, dark, sharp, measuring. It was the kind of look that decided fates without discussion. People had disappeared under that gaze. Cities had changed because of it. Natasha felt it hit her chest. She did not stop. She did not speak. She walked closer, stopping just far enough to avoid being touched by the guards who tensed instantly, waiting for their boss's signal. One gesture, one nod, and she would be dragged away, or worse. Simon did not move. Instead of asking permission, instead of explaining herself. Natasha placed the tray down on the edge of a nearby table. Then she lifted her hand and began to tap, softly, evenly. Her fingers touched the wood in a slow, deliberate rhythm, not random, not rushed, a pattern designed to be felt more than heard. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The sound was barely audible, ridiculously small compared to the tension filling the room. But something changed. One of the twins' breathing stuttered, then slowed. Just a fraction. The shaking lost its sharp edge, becoming uneven instead of violent. The other child's crying softened, turning into short, broken sounds instead of screams. Natasha adjusted the rhythm without looking away. Her entire focus narrowed to the children, to the timing, to the space between sounds. Tap, tap, longer pause. The restaurant held its breath. Seconds passed. Maybe longer. No one dared move. Even the guards seemed unsure, caught between instinct and confusion. Then it happened. One child's chest rose and fell in a deeper, steadier pattern. The other slumped slightly, exhaustion replacing panic. The shaking did not vanish completely, but it loosened its grip. The impossible had just happened. Silence crashed over the room. Simon stared at the woman in the server's uniform, not with gratitude, not with relief, with something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. For the first time in years, something had happened in his presence that he had not ordered, not predicted, not controlled. A variable had entered his world without permission. Natasha finally lowered her hand. Only then did she become aware of how badly her fingers were trembling. She looked up. Her eyes met Simon Gambino's. In that moment, neither of them spoke. Neither of them understood the full weight of what had just occurred. But both felt it. A line had been crossed. Natasha did not yet know that this was the last night of her ordinary life. She did not know that she had just drawn the attention of a man who never let go of what he claimed. She did not know that the quiet rhythm she had tapped into existence would echo through her future in ways she could not escape. She only knew one thing. Whatever happened next would not be safe. And Simon Gambino, watching her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, already knew something else. He would not let her walk away. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The restaurant did not return to normal after that night. It never could. Within minutes of the twins being escorted out through a private exit, the remaining guests were dismissed without explanation. Credit cards were refunded before anyone asked. Phones were politely but firmly confiscated until people reached the street. By the time the doors closed, the world outside knew nothing. Inside, everything had already changed. Natasha was led through a narrow corridor she had never noticed before, her footsteps echoing too loudly against the marble floor. No one touched her, yet she felt surrounded from every angle. 2 guards walked ahead, 2 behind. Their silence was heavier than threats. She kept her back straight, her chin level. Panic would not help her now. They stopped in a private lounge overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline drowning in gold and shadow. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. Simon Gambino stood near the window, his back to her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Natasha became acutely aware of her breathing, of the faint ache in her fingers where adrenaline still lingered. She wondered if this was the moment she should explain herself. Apologize? Justify her actions? She said nothing. Simon turned slowly. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not because of his height or build, but because of the way he occupied space, as if the room adjusted itself around him. His face remained unreadable, dark eyes fixed on her with unsettling focus. "You knew what was happening to them," he said. It was not a question. Natasha nodded once. "Yes. How I've seen it before." Where? She hesitated. The truth felt fragile here, dangerously human. In clinics, therapy rooms, children who couldn't regulate their sensory input. Simon studied her as if peeling back layers. "You're a server. Not by choice." That earned the slightest pause. Not a softening, but a recalculation. "Explain," he said. Natasha inhaled. "I was trained in neurological music therapy. Rhythm, pattern, predictability. Sometimes sound can do what words can't. Sometimes," Simon repeated. "You were very certain." "I was," she admitted quietly. "Because if I was wrong, they would have gotten worse." Silence returned, thick and deliberate. Natasha sensed that this was not interrogation. It was evaluation. Simon moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. "You took a risk." "Yes." "You took it without permission." "Yes." Most people would have lowered their eyes. Natasha did not. Fear was there, coiled tightly inside her, but something stronger kept her gaze steady. Perhaps it was the memory of the twins shaking hands. Perhaps it was the certainty that if she backed down now, everything she had done would lose its meaning. Simon noticed. "People don't do that," he said. "Not around me. I wasn't thinking about you." She replied before she could stop herself. The air sharpened instantly, A dangerous silence fell between them. Natasha felt the weight of her words settle like a blade balanced on its edge. Simon's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Something colder. That, he said softly, is the most honest thing anyone has said to me tonight. He stepped back and gestured toward the city. Sit. Natasha obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of a leather chair. Simon remained standing. You prevented a medical escalation, he continued. You did it without equipment. Without warning. In a room full of people who would have killed you for a wrong move. Yes. Why? Natasha swallowed. Because no one else was helping. That answer lingered longer than expected. Simon turned away, staring out at the lights below. You understand that after tonight. You cannot simply return to carrying plates. Her chest tightened. I understand. I could make you disappear, he said calmly. Or I could make sure you never worry about money again. The two options hung in the air like opposite ends of the same chain. Natasha chose her words carefully. And what would you want in return? Simon faced her again. My children. Her pulse spiked. You will come with us, he said, cutting her off. You will stay where they stay. You will do whatever you did tonight whenever it is needed. For how long? As long as I decide. There it was, the truth beneath the polished surface. Not employment, ownership. Natasha's fingers curled into her palm. She thought of her unpaid bills, her empty apartment, the future she had been surviving instead of living. She thought of the twins' breathing finally slowing under her hands. And if I refuse, she asked. Simon did not hesitate. You won't. He placed a folder on the table between them. It was thin, no paperwork, just a single number written inside. Natasha's breath caught. It was enough to erase her debts, enough to give her back years of her life. Her silence stretched. Simon watched her closely. He did not rush her. He knew time favored him. Finally, Natasha closed the folder. I have conditions, she said. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Brief, controlled, gone almost immediately. You're not in a position to negotiate. She met his gaze. Your children are not machines. If you want results, I need autonomy with them. Simon considered her, weighing risk against necessity. You'll have what you need, and I don't leave without your permission, she added. Testing the boundary? A slow nod. Correct. The agreement settled between them, heavy and irreversible. As guards reappeared to escort her out, Natasha realized something chilling. She had not been hired. She had been chosen. And Simon Gambino, watching her walk away, already knew this woman would become far more dangerous to him than any enemy who carried a gun. Natasha arrived at the penthouse just before dawn. The city below was still breathing in half-light, streets blurred with early fog and distant sirens. But up here everything was silent, sealed off from time itself. The elevator opened directly into the living space, a deliberate design choice meant to remind visitors that once they entered, there was no threshold left to cross back over. She stepped out slowly. The penthouse was vast, impeccably designed, and profoundly empty. Polished stone floors reflected soft, indirect lighting. Expensive art lined the walls, chosen more for value than beauty. Nothing was out of place. Nothing felt lived in. A woman approached her, elegant and restrained, introducing herself as the head of household staff. Her tone was polite, her eyes observant. Natasha caught the subtle shift in posture when she realized this server was not merely passing through. You'll be staying here, the woman said, gesturing down a long hallway. Your room is prepared. Natasha nodded, absorbing everything without comment. She understood this language, courtesy layered over control. Before she could be shown any further, a small sound reached her ears. It was not loud, barely audible, really. A faint, repetitive tapping, irregular and sharp, like fingernails against glass. Her attention snapped toward the source. The children are awake, she said. The woman paused, clearly unused to being interrupted. Breakfast is scheduled in 30 minutes. That won't work, Natasha replied gently. They're already overwhelmed. A beat of silence followed. Then, reluctantly, the woman led her toward the east wing. The twins' room was unlike anything Natasha had expected. It was immaculate, too immaculate. The walls were white, not warm ivory or soft cream, but clinical white. The furniture was minimal, smooth-edged, bolted discreetly into place. There were toys, but few, all carefully chosen for safety rather than joy. No music, no color variation, no visual anchor for restless minds. Two small figures sat on the floor, backs pressed to opposite walls, rocking slightly. Their eyes were wide, unfocused, hands clenched in familiar tension. Natasha felt something tighten painfully in her chest. This wasn't protection. It was deprivation disguised as care. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle them, and began to hum under her breath. A simple tone, low and steady. The rocking eased, almost imperceptibly. Behind her, she sensed movement. Simon Gambino stood in the doorway. He did not announce himself. He never did. His presence filled the room without effort, casting a shadow that reached all the way to where Natasha knelt. "You're early," he said. "They don't follow schedules." She replied quietly. "They follow signals." Simon's gaze swept the room, then settled on his children. This room was designed by specialists. "I don't doubt that," Natasha said. "But they designed it to be safe, not soothing." That earned his full attention. She rose slowly, turning to face him. "They need predictability, yes, but also warmth, texture, sound. This space is telling them to stay still when their bodies are begging to move." Simon's jaw tightened. "They're alive. That's my priority." "And they're barely living," she countered before caution could stop her. The air shifted. Staff outside the room froze, instinctively sensing danger. For a long moment, Simon said nothing. His expression hardened, eyes dark with something Natasha could not yet name. Anger, perhaps, or fear, sharpened into something crueler. "You don't understand what it takes to keep them alive," he said. "I understand exactly what it costs them." She answered softly. The twins whimpered almost in unison, the tension between the adults rippling outward. Natasha turned back to them immediately, lowering herself again, offering her presence like an anchor. Simon watched her carefully. She didn't touch the children right away. She adjusted the lighting instead, dimming it by fractions. She pulled a small, textured cloth from her pocket, something she had carried out of habit, and placed it between them. She tapped a rhythm on the floor, slower this time, deeper. The children responded. Not dramatically, not instantly, but enough. Simon felt the shift like a physical sensation. The tightness in his chest loosened just slightly. He hated it. He hated that this woman was right, later, in the main living area. Natasha stood facing him again, exhaustion finally creeping into her bones. "This isn't sustainable," she said. "Not for them, not for you." He studied her from across the room. "You're asking me to loosen control. I'm asking you to trust me." "Trust." The word landed like an insult. "You have freedom with them," Simon said after a pause. "Within limits." "What limits?" Natasha asked. "No weapons in their rooms," he replied. "No visitors. No decisions without my knowledge." "And emotional isolation?" she asked. His eyes narrowed. "That's non-negotiable." Natasha held his gaze. "Then they will never get better." The silence stretched thin. Simon turned away first. "We'll revisit this." It was not agreement, but it wasn't dismissal either. As Natasha was shown to her room, she realized how small it was compared to the rest of the penthouse. Functional, contained, a reminder of her place. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. She had stepped into a fortress built on fear, and somewhere deep inside it, two children were quietly asking for something no amount of money or power could buy. Above her, Simon Gambino stood alone in the darkened living room, watching the city lights flicker below. For the first time, the fortress felt fragile, and he did not know whether to strengthen its walls or let them crack. The first rule Natasha broke was not intentional. It happened late in the afternoon, when the light outside softened and the penthouse slipped into its quietest hours. The twins were restless, pacing the length of their room in short, uneven bursts, energy building without release. Natasha felt it coming before the symptoms sharpened. Their movements grew sharper. Their breaths lost rhythm. She reached instinctively for music. Not loud, not sudden, just a low-frequency hum from a small speaker she had requested earlier and been denied. She had brought it anyway, hidden at the bottom of her bag, a calculated risk she knew might cost her everything. The sound filled the room gently, barely more than vibration. One of the twins froze. The other tilted their head, listening. Then the door opened. Simon Gambino stood there, his presence immediate and heavy, as if the air itself had thickened around him. Two guards remained just outside, visible in the reflection of the glass wall. The music cut off. "Turn it off," Simon said. Natasha did not move. "It's helping." "I said turn it off." She met his gaze. "Give me 30 seconds." The room seemed to hold its breath. The guards stiffened, hands hovering dangerously close to their weapons. No one spoke to Simon Gambino this way, not twice. He stepped inside. The twins flinched at the sound of his shoes against the floor. Natasha saw it instantly, the way their bodies tightened, the progress of the last few minutes unraveling. "That," she said quietly, gesturing toward the children, "is what I mean." Simon's jaw tightened. "You're overstepping. I'm doing my job. Your job does not include defying me in my own house." Natasha rose slowly, placing herself between him and the children without fully realizing she was doing it. The movement was subtle, instinctive, and unmistakable. Silence detonated. For a fraction of a second, Simon looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as an asset, not as a solution, but as an obstacle. "You don't stand between me and my children," he said, voice low and even. Natasha's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she did not move aside. "I will," she replied, just as softly, "when you are the reason they're afraid." The words landed with dangerous precision. One of the guards took a step forward. Simon raised a hand without looking back. "Stop!" The twins whimpered, the tension in the room spilling over into them like static. Natasha knelt immediately, grounding herself at their level, tapping the floor in a slow, familiar pattern. She did not look away from Simon as she did it. He watched the scene unfold, anger coiled tight beneath his control. He was not used to being challenged in matters of survival. Fear was a language he spoke fluently, one he had used to keep his family alive for years. But this was different. This fear was his. "Leave," he said to the guards. They hesitated. "Now?" The door closed, sealing the four of them inside the room. Simon exhaled slowly. "You're asking me to become careless. I'm asking you to become present." Natasha replied. "There's a difference." He laughed once, sharply. "Presence gets people killed." "So does isolation," she countered. Just more quietly. The twins had begun to calm again, the rhythm working its way into their breathing. Simon noticed it despite himself. He hated that he noticed. "You don't know what I've lost," he said. Natasha finally looked up at him. "Then let me help you stop losing more." The words slipped past her guard, rawer than she intended. For a moment, something flickered in Simon's eyes. Grief, perhaps, or memory. It vanished almost instantly. "You will not play music without my approval," he said. "You will not alter their environment without clearance, and you will never position yourself against me again." Natasha stood, hands trembling at her sides. "Then they will plateau, at best. And if I allow it," Simon asked, "if I loosen control and something happens, then you can blame me," she said, "completely." He studied her face, searching for hesitation. Finding none unsettled him more than fear ever had. After a long silence, Simon reached into his jacket. Natasha's breath caught. He did not pull out a gun. He placed it carefully on the nearest table instead, the metal making a soft, final sound as it touched the surface. "I won't bring weapons into their rooms," he said. "Ever." The words felt monumental. Natasha stared at the gun, then back at him. "That's a start." He met her gaze steadily. "Do not mistake this for surrender." "I won't," she said. "It's trust." He did not correct her. That night, after the twins were finally asleep, Simon stood alone in the hallway outside their room. The door remained open, light spilling softly into the darkness. He could hear Natasha inside, moving quietly, humming under her breath as she adjusted blankets and dimmed lamps. Something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Control had always been his armor. Tonight, for the first time, he had set part of it down, and he wasn't sure whether that made him stronger or exposed. Night settled over the penthouse like a held breath. The city below glittered relentlessly, unaware of the quiet war being fought several stories above it. Inside the east wing, the twins lay restless beneath their blankets, eyes open, bodies tense, caught between exhaustion and unease. The earlier calm had not lasted. It never did at night. Natasha sensed it the moment she stepped back into the room. Their breathing was shallow again, not panicked, but alert in a way that spoke of minds unable to fully let go. She moved carefully, dimming the lights by small increments, closing the curtains just enough to soften the sharp geometry of the skyline. Simon watched from the doorway. He had not intended to stay. He told himself he was only observing, ensuring protocols were followed. Yet minutes passed, then more, and he remained where he was, silent and immovable. "They won't sleep like this," Natasha murmured, more to herself than to him. Simon crossed his arms. "They're safe. They're guarded," she corrected gently. "Safety is different." One of the twins turned onto their side, fingers clenching the edge of the blanket until the fabric wrinkled beneath the strain. Natasha approached slowly and knelt beside the bed, placing her hand close but not touching. "May I?" she asked softly, glancing back at Simon. The question surprised him. Permission was not something people usually asked of him. They either assumed it or feared it. The deliberate pause, the respect in her tone, unsettled him more than defiance had. He nodded once. Natasha rested her palm lightly on the mattress, letting her presence be felt without intrusion. She began tapping a rhythm again, slower than before, deeper, meant to echo the pace of a resting heart. Tap, pause, tap. The twins' eyes fluttered, following the sound more than her movement. Simon stepped closer without realizing he was doing it. "Come here," Natasha said quietly. He stopped short. "What they need to associate calm with you too," she explained. "Not just me." His instinctive reaction was resistance. He had kept himself distant on purpose. Distance kept them alive. Distance kept his enemies guessing. Distance kept his grief contained. Natasha looked up at him, her expression steady. "You don't have to say anything. Just sit." Simon hesitated. Then, slowly, he lowered himself onto the edge of the bed. The twins noticed immediately. One stiffened. The other turned their head, eyes wide and uncertain. Natasha adjusted the rhythm, softer now, slower, anchoring the moment. "Breathe with them," she murmured. "Not for them. With them." Simon clenched his jaw. Breathing was automatic. He had survived gunfights, betrayals, nights soaked in blood. He did not need instruction on how to breathe. But this was different. He inhaled too sharp. Natasha met his eyes and exhaled deliberately, showing him without words. Again. This time, Simon followed. The effect was subtle but undeniable. One of the twins' shoulders relaxed. The other's grip on the blanket loosened. Something in Simon's chest shifted, painfully tight and unfamiliar. He had never been this close to them when they slept. Not like this, not without armor. Minutes passed. The rhythm continued. Natasha remained kneeling, her presence steady, grounding the space. Simon stayed seated, afraid that if he moved, the fragile balance would collapse. Eventually, the twins' breathing evened out, their eyes closed. Sleep, real and deep, claimed them at last. Natasha exhaled softly and leaned back on her heels, exhaustion finally surfacing. She realized then how close she was to Simon, close enough to sense the warmth of him, the tension held tightly beneath his controlled exterior. "They did well," she said quietly. "So did you," he replied before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, unguarded. Natasha looked at him, surprised. "You stayed." Simon stared at his hands. "I needed to see if it worked." And she asked. He did not answer immediately. He glanced toward the sleeping children, then back at her. It did. They moved to the sitting area just outside the room, keeping the door ajar. The soft glow from inside spilled into the hallway, a fragile barrier against the darkness beyond. "You don't sleep much," Natasha said after a moment. He almost smiled. Almost. Sleeping is inefficient. She studied him. So is fear. But it's effective. He met her gaze, something dark and tired in his eyes. "You think I don't know that silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. You lost their mother," Natasha said carefully. Simon stiffened. The air sharpened instantly. "That's not your concern." "No," she agreed softly. "But it's theirs." The words landed quietly, without accusation. Simon looked away, jaw tight, the city lights reflecting off the glass like distant fire. "I will not lose them," he said. Natasha nodded. "Then let yourself be part of what saves them." He said nothing. Later that night, Natasha dozed off on the floor beside the bed, unwilling to leave the twins alone. Simon returned quietly, intending only to check on them. He stopped short when he saw her there, curled against the side of the bed, one hand resting protectively near the twins. For a long moment, he watched her. This woman had entered his world without permission, challenged his rules, softened his children, and now slept in the most guarded room of his empire without fear. Something dangerous stirred beneath his ribs. Not desire, trust. And Simon Gambino had learned long ago that trust was the most lethal vulnerability of all. The change was subtle at first. It began with looks that lingered too long, conversations that stopped when Natasha entered a room, guards who adjusted their stance a fraction slower than before. The penthouse still functioned with perfect precision, but the atmosphere had shifted, as if the walls themselves were listening. Natasha noticed. She always did, She felt it in the way the head of staff began requesting approval for things that had already been agreed upon. In the way security protocols around the children were quietly revised without her input. In the way Simon's men watched her now, not with dismissal, but with calculation. She had crossed an invisible threshold. Simon felt it too, though he refused to name it. Reports arrived daily, neatly organized, stripped of emotion. A rival syndicate had been asking questions, not about him, about his household, about changes in routine, about a woman who had appeared seemingly from nowhere and gained unprecedented access to his most protected space. "She's a liability," one of his lieutenants said during a closed-door meeting. Simon's response was cold and immediate. "She's necessary." The word echoed longer than it should have. That evening, Natasha found Simon waiting in the sitting room outside the children's wing. He was standing near the window, phone in hand, jaw set in a way she had learned meant restraint rather than calm. "You've been followed," he said without preamble. Her breath caught. "Went twice this week. At a distance. Nothing close enough to act on. Then why tell me?" she asked. "Because it stops today." Natasha studied his face. "You want me to stay inside?" "Yes." The word was final, a command wrapped in concern. "That won't work," she replied. "If someone is watching, changing my behavior confirms it." Simon turned to her sharply. "This isn't a discussion. It has to be," she insisted. "Your enemies won't come for you through guns. They'll come through patterns, through me, through the children." The tension between them tightened, pulling in opposite directions. Simon stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Which is exactly why you don't leave this floor." Natasha felt the familiar spark of defiance flare, but this time it was tempered by something heavier. "Understanding? You're scared," she said quietly. His eyes hardened. "I'm prepared." "No," she said. "You're afraid of losing control again." Silence fell, sharp and brittle. That night, Natasha stayed close to the children, keeping the room calm with familiar rhythms and low light. The twins responded well, settling more easily than before. Progress was undeniable. And dangerous. Simon stood guard outside longer than necessary, listening to the faint hum of her voice through the door. He told himself he was protecting them. He did not tell himself he was protecting her. The alert came just after midnight. A breach attempt. External cameras glitched for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to raise alarms, too short to identify a threat. Simon moved instantly, issuing orders in clipped tones, the penthouse locking down with seamless efficiency. Guards took positions, floors sealed, elevators frozen. Natasha felt the shift immediately. The lights dimmed further. The soft white noise she used cut out abruptly, replaced by silence. One of the twins stirred, sensing the change, their breathing quickening. She reached for them, grounding, steadying, her own pulse racing. Simon entered the room without knocking. "We're relocating," he said. Natasha looked up. "No." The word startled even her. "They're not stable enough to move," she continued, lowering her voice. "Not right now." His gaze flicked to the children, then back to her. "This isn't negotiable. Neither is their nervous system," she replied. For a moment, the air felt charged enough to shatter. Then a distant sound echoed through the penthouse. Not close, not loud, but unmistakably wrong. Simon's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. Natasha stepped in front of the children again, heart pounding. "Simon." He froze, not because of the sound, because she had said his name. No title, no distance, just his name, spoken like an anchor. He met her eyes. Something raw flickered there, exposed and unguarded. "Trust me," she said. "Just this once." Another sound followed. Closer now. A test. A probe. Simon made a decision that would have horrified his men. He lowered his weapon. 5 minutes, he said tightly. "That's all you get." Natasha nodded and went back to work. Every movement precise, deliberate, holding the twins in the present with rhythm and breath. The world narrowed to heartbeats and timing. Outside, Simon coordinated security with ruthless efficiency, eyes never leaving the door. The threat never breached the inner perimeter. Whoever it was retreated, satisfied with confirmation rather than confrontation. When the all-clear came, the penthouse exhaled as one. The twins slept through it. Natasha sagged slightly, exhaustion washing over her. Simon watched her carefully, something dark and unsettled twisting in his chest. Later, alone in his office, Simon reviewed the footage again and again, the angles, the timing, the precision. This had not been a random test. It had been a message. They knew about her. And that meant one thing. Natasha was no longer just inside his world. She was the crack his enemies were already trying to widen. The warning came too late. It arrived disguised as routine, buried beneath layers of false calm that Simon Gambino had learned to distrust but could never fully erase. The penthouse woke to a morning that looked ordinary on the surface. Security rotations ran on time. Internal systems reported green. The city outside glittered as if nothing in the world was wrong. Natasha felt it anyway. It was a pressure beneath her ribs, a tightening that had nothing to do with the twins and everything to do with the silence between sounds. She moved more slowly than usual, keeping the children close, grounding them with quiet rhythms and familiar textures. They were calm, too calm. Simon watched from the corridor, eyes sharp, instincts restless. "You feel it too," Natasha said softly without turning. "Yes," he replied. He didn't ask what it was. They both knew better than to give unease a name too early. The first shot shattered the illusion. It didn't come from inside the penthouse. It came from beyond it, tearing through reinforced glass at an angle so precise, it spoke of planning rather than chance. The sound was violent, deafening, a crack that ripped the air apart. The twins screamed. Natasha reacted before thought could catch up. She moved, fast and instinctive, throwing herself over the children, her body curling around them as the world exploded into chaos. Alarms screamed, lights flashed, security doors slammed shut in a cascade of steel and code. Simon was already moving. He crossed the room in seconds, weapon drawn, barking orders into his comm as guards flooded the corridors. His mind segmented the crisis with brutal efficiency. Trajectory, entry point, shooter distance, escape routes. Then he saw the blood. It wasn't much at first, just a dark bloom spreading across Natasha's shoulder, staining the pale fabric of her shirt. She hadn't even realized she'd been hit yet. Adrenaline kept her upright, focused entirely on the twins beneath her. "Don't move," she whispered to them, voice shaking but steady enough to hold. "Stay with me." Simon dropped to his knees beside her. For a heartbeat. The world narrowed to the sound of his own pulse. "Natasha," he said sharply. "You're hit." She glanced down, surprise flickering across her face before pain caught up. It didn't reach them, she said. "That's what matters." The words slammed into him harder than the gunshot ever could. He pressed his hand against the wound without thinking, applying pressure with the precision of someone who had stopped too many people from bleeding out. His hands were steady. His eyes were not. "Stay awake," he ordered. She gave a breathless, almost amused sound. "You don't get to order me right now." Despite everything, despite the chaos and the blood and the screams echoing through the penthouse, something twisted painfully in his chest. Not anger, not fear alone. Something far worse. The shooter was neutralized within minutes. A decoy team. A distraction meant to test response time and provoke exactly this kind of exposure. Simon's men moved with lethal efficiency, securing the perimeter, erasing evidence, ensuring the world outside would never know how close he had come to losing everything. None of it mattered. Natasha was pale now, her breaths shallow as the adrenaline ebbed. Simon lifted her carefully, cradling her as if she were made of something fragile and irreplaceable. The twins clung to him, shaking, their cries breaking something open in his chest he had sealed long ago. "I've got you," he murmured. "To all of them, I've got you." They rushed her to the private medical suite hidden within the building. The doctor worked quickly, efficiently, removing the bullet lodged dangerously close to bone, but miraculously missing anything vital. Simon stood inches away the entire time, blood drying on his hands, his mind replaying the moment again and again. The angle, the timing, the way Natasha had moved without hesitation. She hadn't protected herself. She had chosen the children. Hours later, when the danger had receded and the penthouse settled into an uneasy quiet, Natasha stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding him. "You're staring," she whispered. His throat tightened. "You scared me." The admission slipped out before he could stop it. She studied his face, seeing something there she had never seen before. Not the controlled authority, not the calculated calm. Something stripped bare. They were scared. She replied, "I couldn't let them be alone." Simon reached for her hand, then hesitated, as if unsure of his right to touch her. Finally, he took it, his grip firm but careful. "You are never doing that again," he said, voice low. She smiled faintly. "You don't mean that." He didn't. That night, as Natasha slept under watchful eyes, Simon stood alone in the darkened living room, city lights reflecting off the glass like distant flames. His men waited for orders, expecting retaliation, blood, a message sent back in kind. Simon gave none. Because this was no longer about territory or dominance. This was personal. Someone had aimed a bullet at his children, and the woman who had stepped in front of them now slept with his blood on her hands and his name unspoken on her lips. For the first time in his life, Simon Gambino understood the truth his enemies had just declared. They had found his weakness, and he would burn the world down before he let them touch it again. The penthouse did not sleep after the shooting. It merely went quiet in the way predators do after blood has been spilled. Every corridor was guarded, every shadow accounted for. The air itself felt sharpened, alert, waiting for the next fracture. Natasha woke to the steady beep of a monitor and the faint scent of antiseptic. For a moment, disorientation wrapped around her like fog. Then memory surged back in fragments, glass shattering, the children's screams, the weight of her own body moving without permission. Pain followed, deep and insistent. She shifted slightly and winced. "You're awake." Simon's voice came from the chair beside her bed, low, controlled, too close. She turned her head and found him there, sleeves rolled up, jacket discarded, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He looked like a man who had not moved in hours. "How long?" she asked. 16 hours, he replied. Her brow creased. "The twins asleep. Together. They won't let anyone else stay with them." She closed her eyes briefly, relief washing through her. "Good." Simon watched her carefully. "The doctor said you were lucky." She let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Luck had nothing to do with it. "No," he agreed. "It didn't." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Natasha became aware of the way his hand rested on the arm of the chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You shouldn't have done that," he said at last. She looked at him. "Which part, any of it?" He replied, "You should have moved. You should have protected yourself." "And let them take the hit?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. "I would have handled it." She held his gaze. "You weren't there yet." The truth of that landed with quiet force. Simon leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You made a choice." "Yes." "You didn't hesitate?" "No." The word hung between them, fragile and unyielding. Simon stood abruptly and crossed to the window. The city spread out beneath him in cold brilliance. "Do you know what happens to people who become leverage in my world?" Natasha watched his reflection in the glass. "I'm starting to—" "You don't belong here," he said. She absorbed that, then replied gently, "Neither do your children." That made him turn. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The distance between them felt charged, electric, threaded with everything neither of them was ready to name. "You scare me," he said quietly. Natasha blinked. "I just took a bullet for your family. That's not what scares me," he replied. She understood then. Later that night, despite protests from the medical staff, Natasha insisted on seeing the twins. Simon allowed it, but only under heavy guard. His presence a constant shadow at her side. The children reacted the moment they saw her. They reached for her without hesitation, small hands clinging tightly as if afraid she might disappear. Natasha sank carefully onto the floor, letting them curl against her, her injured shoulders screaming in protest she refused to acknowledge. "It's okay," she murmured, pressing her forehead lightly to theirs. "I'm right here." Simon stood back, watching the scene unfold with an ache he did not recognize and did not want to. When the twins finally settled again, exhaustion claiming them, Natasha remained on the floor, back against the bed, breathing shallowly. Simon approached, kneeling beside her. "You need to rest." "So do you," she replied. He almost smiled. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. The touch was light, tentative, as if he were testing the reality of her being there. Natasha froze. Their eyes met. The air between them shifted, thickened, drawing them closer without movement. Simon's hand lingered, his thumb resting just below her temple. He could feel her pulse beneath his skin. Fast. Alive. For one dangerous second, everything else fell away. Then Natasha gently caught his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. The word was not rejection. It was warning. Simon's hand stilled. His expression darkened with understanding, restraint snapping back into place like armor reforged. "You don't owe me anything," he said, pulling away. "Not gratitude, not loyalty, not this." "I know," she replied softly. "That's why it matters." He stood, turning away before the moment could take anything else from them. Later, alone in his office, Simon reviewed the intelligence reports that had come in since the attack. Names surfaced. Alliances shifted. Patterns emerged with brutal clarity. This was no longer a warning. It was the opening move of a war, and Natasha was standing at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. As dawn crept over the city, Simon made a decision that would change everything. He would not remove her from the board. He would move the board around her. Because the truth he could no longer escape was this: Natasha had not only survived the bullet meant to break him, she had changed the way his world beat. And once a rhythm like that took hold, it was impossible to silence it again. The days that followed were deceptively calm. Security tightened, but discreetly, the penthouse remained sealed. Yet life inside it resumed a fragile rhythm. The twins laughed more now, their sleep deeper, their eyes brighter. Natasha healed slowly, her movements careful but steady, refusing to retreat into weakness. And Simon watched it all with a focus that bordered on reverence. But calm, Simon knew, was often the quiet before a reckoning. The truth found Natasha by accident. She was searching the private archive for old therapeutic research Simon had authorized when she came across a file mislabeled under medical records. One name caught her attention instantly. Not Simon's, not the twins, a woman's name. Elena Gambino? Simon's wife. Natasha hesitated only a moment before opening it. The contents unraveled something she had not expected. Security footage logs, internal investigation notes, a timeline that did not align with the official story of a tragic accident. The final entry ended abruptly, stamped sealed by Simon himself. Her breath caught. Elena had not died by chance. She had been targeted. Natasha closed the file, hands trembling. The weight of the knowledge pressed heavily against her chest. She understood then why Simon had built his fortress so high, why fear had shaped every rule, every boundary. That night, she confronted him. Simon was standing by the window when she entered his office, the city lights painting sharp lines across his face. He did not turn when she spoke his name. "You never told me how she died," Natasha said quietly. Silence answered her. "You don't owe me the truth," she continued. "But your children do." He turned then, slowly, his expression unreadable. "You went into my files. I did," she admitted, "and I wish I hadn't." For a long moment, Simon said nothing. Then he walked past her, closing the office door behind them with deliberate finality. "She was killed because of me," he said, "because of who I am, because I trusted the wrong people." Natasha felt the pain in his words like a physical ache. "I thought if I controlled everything," he continued, voice low and raw, "if I removed every variable, I could prevent it from happening again. And instead," Natasha said softly, "you froze time." He met her gaze, something fractured and unguarded breaking through. "I won't bury another person I love." The word echoed between them. Love. Natasha's chest tightened. "Simon, the way you're living isn't keeping them safe. It's keeping you trapped." His jaw clenched. "And what would you have me do? Tear down everything that keeps them alive?" "No," she replied. "Change why it exists." The silence stretched, thick with possibility and fear. Later that night, Natasha made a decision of her own. She packed quietly, folding her clothes with deliberate care. She left a note on the table in her room. It was simple, honest. "They need you brave, not armored." "So do I." Simon found the note just after dawn. The absence hit him harder than any bullet. He found the twins awake, sitting on their bed, eyes searching the room with confusion and something dangerously close to fear. "Where's Natasha?" one of them asked. Simon swallowed. She needed time. The words tasted like failure. That morning, Simon Gambino dismantled his empire with ruthless efficiency. Not completely, not foolishly, but enough. He summoned his inner circle and issued orders that shocked them. Alliances severed, operations rerouted, blood debts settled with finality, enemies erased not with spectacle, but with precision. This time, he wasn't defending power. He was protecting a future. As night fell, Simon stood alone on the rooftop, wind cutting cold against his face. He held Natasha's note in his hand, the paper worn soft from being folded too many times. He understood now. Love was not the weakness his enemies had discovered. Fear was. And Simon Gambino was done letting it rule him. Somewhere in the city below, Natasha watched the skyline from the window of a small apartment she had borrowed, her shoulder aching, her heart heavier than she had expected. She did not know if he would come, but she knew this much. If he did, it would be because he chose her freely, not because he needed her to survive, but because he was finally ready to live. Writing Part 10, A place called home, the city was quiet in the hour before sunrise. Natasha stood by the window of the small apartment, watching the sky shift from ink to pale gray. The world felt oddly suspended, as if holding space for a decision that had not yet been made. Her shoulders still ached when she moved too quickly, a dull reminder of how close everything had come to ending differently. She told herself she had done the right thing. Leaving had not been an escape. It had been a boundary. For the first time in her life, she had chosen not to be held in place by fear, obligation, or someone else's need. Whatever came next had to be real, or it had to be nothing at all. A knock sounded at the door. Not urgent, not commanding, just 3 soft taps. Natasha froze. She knew, before she reached for the handle. Simon stood on the other side, no guards in sight, no weapons visible. He looked different. Still composed, still powerful. But something essential had shifted. The armor she had learned to read was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt earned rather than imposed. "I didn't come to ask you to return," he said quietly. "I came to ask if I may come in. The question undid her. She stepped aside. They stood facing each other in the small living room. The contrast between this modest space and the penthouse both of them remembered sharp and undeniable. Simon took it in without judgment. "I changed things," he said after a moment. "Not because you left. Because I finally understood why you did." Natasha watched his face carefully. "And the children. They're safe," he replied. "And they know you chose them even when you chose yourself." Her throat tightened. "I won't cage them again," Simon continued. "Or you, whatever this is. It has to be chosen. Every day." Silence filled the room. Not heavy, not tense, just honest. Natasha crossed her arms lightly, steadying herself. "You don't need me to fix your world." "I know." He said, "I need you because you make it worth living in." The words were simple, unguarded. They landed without pressure, without demand. Natasha exhaled. Later that morning, she returned to the penthouse not as someone being brought back, but as someone walking in by choice. The twins ran to her the moment the elevator doors opened, laughter spilling into the vast space that no longer felt empty. Simon watched from a distance, letting the moment belong to them. The penthouse itself had changed. Color warmed the walls. Music hummed softly through hidden speakers. The rooms breathed now, no longer frozen in vigilance. In the weeks that followed, Simon dismantled what remained of the old fear piece by piece. The empire still existed, but it no longer dictated every heartbeat of the people inside it. Boundaries were redrawn, power reshaped into something quieter, more deliberate. And Natasha stayed. Not as a possession, not as protection, as family. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights flickered on, Simon found Natasha on the balcony, the twins asleep inside. The air was cool, gentle. "You know," he said, standing beside her, "I used to believe love was a liability." She smiled faintly. "And now I know it's a responsibility," he replied. "One I choose." He reached for her hand, slow enough that she could stop him if she wished. She didn't. They stood together in the quiet, fingers entwined, watching the city stretch endlessly below them. For the first time, Simon Gambino felt no need to control it. This place, once a fortress, had become something else entirely. A home. And in that home, fear no longer set the rules.